You have money sitting in a savings account right now. Maybe it's $5,000. Maybe it's 20. Maybe it's everything you've managed to put aside over the last 3 years. Open, transferred in every month. The same ritual, the same discipline, the same quiet satisfaction of watching the number go up. Here's what nobody told you. The people who run that bank, the people who designed that savings account, who set that interest rate, who sent you the welcome email with the pie chart showing your money growing, those people do not have their money in a savings account. Not a single one of them. And it's not because they're rich, it's because they know something about that account that you were never supposed to find out. You're sitting at a desk on the 35th floor. It's 6 in the morning. The screens are already on. The decisions that will affect millions of people's money today were already made last night. You learn something very quickly in that environment. 2 sets of rules exist, not because anyone wrote them down that way, because nobody had to. The first set of rules is what the bank sells: savings accounts, mutual funds, retirement products with names that sound like safety, secure growth, stable income, capital preservation, products built around one idea that your money is best managed by someone else on your behalf for a fee that compounds quietly every year, whether the market goes up or down. The second set of rules is what the people inside that building actually do, and it looks almost nothing like what they sell. I spent 20 years in those rooms. Here's what I watched consistently, from the analysts on the floor to the directors in the corner offices. They don't save. They own, not in the abstract sense, in the most literal, mechanical sense possible. The people who understand how the financial system works do not put their money in instruments designed to hold value. They put their money in instruments designed to generate it. A savings account is a loan. When you deposit money in a bank, you are lending that money to the bank. The bank pays you interest on that loan, currently somewhere between 0.5% and 5% depending on the account. Then the bank takes your money and lends it out at a rate between 6% and 24%. The spread between what they pay you and what they charge everyone else, that's the business. That's always been the business. JP Morgan Chase reported net interest income of over $38 billion in adjusted figures in a recent fiscal year. That number is the spread multiplied across every savings account, every checking account, every certificate of deposit held by ordinary customers. The institution you trusted with your money turned your deposit into one of the most profitable line items on their balance sheet. The people who run that business do not participate in it as customers. They participate in it as owners. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase for nearly 2 decades, has never publicly suggested that ordinary people keep their wealth in savings accounts. His own disclosed holdings are almost entirely in JP Morgan stock, equity, ownership of the machine, not a deposit inside it. The directors I sat across from operated the same way. Not because they talked about it. They didn't, because it was simply the water they swam in. Nobody in those rooms thought of a savings account as a wealth-building tool. It was a liquidity buffer, a place to park 30, 60, 90 days of operating expenses, nothing more. They hold equity. Shares of companies. They hold real assets, property that generates income, not property that sits and waits. They hold instruments where the return is not fixed by someone else in advance. And they do all of this inside structures that reduce the tax drag on every dollar those assets generate. None of this is secret. None of it is illegal. What it requires is knowing the option exists and understanding why the bank never volunteers that information during the onboarding call. You're sitting across from a financial advisor. She's been with the bank for 11 years. She's good at her job. She genuinely believes in the products she's recommending. and she has absolutely no incentive, structural, financial, or otherwise, to tell you that she handles her own retirement savings in a completely different way, then she's about to recommend you handle yours. That's not corruption. That's just how the system is built. So what do you do with this? 3 things, in order. First, audit what you're actually holding and what it's actually costing you. Pull up every financial product you currently have: savings accounts, retirement funds, investment products sold to you by a bank or advisor. For each one, find 2 numbers, the annual return and the annual fee. Not the headline return, the net return after fees. In many retail investment products, the fee structure alone, management fees, platform fees, fund fees, runs between 1.2% and 2.5% per year. On $100,000, that's between $1,200 and $2,500 leaving your account every 12 months. In good years and bad years, whether the fund outperforms the market or doesn't. Here's a specific example. A popular actively managed fund, sold through major retail banks, charges an expense ratio of around 1.5% annually. Over 20 years, on an initial investment of $50,000 with average market returns, that fee structure costs you roughly $80,000 in lost compounding. Not $80,000 paid in a single check, $80,000 that never grew because it left your account quietly, every year, in increments small enough that you never noticed. You're not being robbed. You agreed to this. It was in the document you signed, but you are paying for a service that the people who designed that service do not use themselves, and that matters. Money. Second, money. Understand the difference between holding money and deploying it. This is the mental shift that changes everything, and it has nothing to do with picking stocks or timing the market. It's simpler than that. Money sitting in a savings account is waiting. Money in an asset, a broad index fund, a rental property, a stake in a business, is working. The compounding effect of deployed capital versus held capital over 10 years at realistic rates is not marginal. On $50,000, the difference between a 1% savings rate and a 7% average annual return in a low-cost index fund is roughly $42,000 over a decade. Not because the index fund is magic, because deployed capital compounds and held capital barely keeps pace with inflation. The legendary Omaha investor has said this publicly and consistently for decades, not as investment advice, but as a description of how capital actually works. His own wealth is not sitting in a savings account. It is deployed in ownership positions in businesses he understands. The principle is not complicated. The application is not reserved for billionaires. What's reserved for people who know the system is the clarity to act on it early, before the compounding years are already behind them. The bankers know this. It's why they're on the other side of the transaction. Third, reduce the friction between you and the instruments they use. Low-cost index funds exist. They are accessible to anyone with a brokerage account. This is not financial advice. I'm not your advisor and I don't know your situation. What I'm telling you is what the data shows and what the people inside the system do with their own money. The average expense ratio on a broad market index fund is 0.3% to 0.20% per year. Mison's compared to 1.5% to 2.5% per year, compared to 1.5% to 2.5% on actively managed funds sold through banks. A low-cost index fund from a major asset manager has an expense ratio of 0.3%. A comparable actively managed funds sold through a retail bank typically runs between 1% and 2%. On $100,000 over 30 years, that difference in fees, assuming identical underlying returns, compounds into a gap of over $200,000. Same market, same years, different fee, different outcome. The performance difference between actively managed funds and passive index funds, measured over 20-year periods, consistently favors the index. Not sometimes, consistently. The index has outperformed roughly 90% of actively managed large-cap funds over any given 20-year window. Not a fringe opinion. It's the documented finding of an annual industry report using real fund data. You don't need to be a director at JP Morgan to access the same fundamental logic they use with their own money. You need to understand what the logic is and stop paying someone to use a different one on your behalf. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. It's designed to generate returns for the people who own it and consistent, modest, fee-generating flows from the people who use it. Both things can be true at the same time. The banker who sold you that savings account isn't lying to you. She's just operating inside a structure that was never built around your financial outcome. Now you know what's on the other side of that desk. What you do with that is yours to decide. If this changed how you see the account you opened last year, tell me in the comments. Want to know what you're sitting on and what you're going to do differently? That's where the real conversation starts. You know where to find me.